When you think of influential men, who do you think of? Do you think of a relative? Do you think of maybe a friend or some star or a musician or a historical figure? The reality is any of these could be your inspiration, but every one of them was influential. Every man influences others. I don't care who you are as a man, you're going to influence others in your life. At some point in your life, you're going to be an influence on someone else. And the choice we have as men is, are we going to influence them to be like us or to not be like us? And that's the key right there. The most obvious example of this is fathers. Fathers have the most influence on their children for good or for bad. When kids have an involved dad, a loving dad, the majority of them are going to turn out well. They're going to turn out very well adjusted. When kids have an uninvolved or absent father or an abusive father, they're going to get involved in a lot of destructive behaviors. See, I worked with teenagers for 30 years, and I can attest to this. Active, involved dads made a huge difference in their children's life. They were a positive influence. But uninvolved dads were just as influential, just not in the positive way, but in a negative way. It's just the way it was. As men, we influence others by the choices we make and how we live. We just do. You are an influence to other people. Not just our own children, but everyone we come in contact with. We choose how we influence. And that makes us a man and not a Muppet. I'm not saying we're always going to be polite and nice to everyone. There are some times you just can't. But I'm saying we choose how we influence by our attitudes and our actions. Because the truth is, leading means leading. It just does. Leaders can be loving, but they can also be tough. Toughness can be one of the most loving things you can be to someone. We've all had those people who loved us enough to kick us in our butt and say, you need to step it up. You need to be a better man. Those people really did love us. We didn't feel it at the time, but we needed it. You think of people who do the SEAL training. SEAL training is incredibly hard. I do not want to go through that, but I've read about it. You've seen the things. Why do they do that? Because they care about those men. And they want every man who becomes a SEAL to be a man who's not going to quit on his brothers. And that's the whole point of the training. So you know what they're doing? They're actually showing a great amount of influence to these men. And they're influencing them to be the best they can be. They're challenging them to be better. You know why? Because they care about them. They don't want a man who's out on the field to have someone else back off them. They don't want to have someone else drop out. And they're really loving these guys by being so hard on them. Now, the truth is, men are influential. Muppets, they're not influential. Why? They're comic relief. We talked about that last week, but too many men have allowed themselves to be put into that comic relief category. But that's a lie. You're not just comic relief. Even if you try to be, you're being an influence. Every man influences others. You say, I'm not hurting anybody with my choices, Dave. I'm just hurting me. I'm not hurting anyone else. That's a lie. You're influencing others by your choices. Even if your choices are bad, even if you live completely by yourself, who you work with, who you hang around, whoever your family is, they're influenced by your choices. Now, they can be influenced for good or for bad, and that's up to you. So what we have to do as men is we have to quit lying to ourselves. Our lives matter as men. We make a difference. We need to quit playing games and take up our role as leaders. Every man's a leader. He just is. You lead yourself and you lead others. There's no getting out of that. You can say, well, I don't want to be a leader. I'm sorry. You're a man. It's who you are. You choose how you lead. You choose how you're going to be an influence, but you make that choice. As men have quit leading themselves, they've kind of dropped out of their influence, so they think. Look at what's happened to society. As men have become less a part of people's lives, as men have backed out of their obligations as dads and as husbands, look at what's happened to our society. Look how the influence has gone in a negative direction. Look how many young people today are raised without a dad. Look how many criminals in prison are there because they didn't have a dad. You say, are you just blaming men? Yes, I am. I am blaming men because we have to take our role. We have to be an influence. You don't want to be a man who influences to the negative. You want to quit being a man who's controlled by others. You want to quit being a man who's only comic relief like a Muppet. You want to quit being a man who just makes excuses. Your influence on others is completely based on you. It's completely based on what you do. Now, you may have been hurt in the past. You may have. You may have made some bad choices in the past. Well, guess what? Join the club. Every man has. But that doesn't mean he has to stop. It doesn't mean he has to quit. It doesn't mean he has to give up being an influence. It's time for us to suck it up and be a man. No one's going to do it for you. The person you have to start with is you. Your greatest influence begins with you influencing yourself. That's what men do. They get themselves up and they get themselves moving. You have to influence yourself to start making good choices. You've got to quit sucking at life and be the man you were designed to be. That's what men do. Muppets can't do it, but men can, and you can.